All right, so as we are looking now carefully at how light affects form, or how it behaves rather when it hits form. As said before, light travels in a straight line, and as was demonstrated with the flashlight, when it hit the form, you could definitely see where the light would have transitioned from being very bright on a particular surface of the form to areas of the form that would have been hidden from the light rays. Those parts appear to be darker because of the formation of shadows. We also would have looked at the fact that the interactions between the light and form, it would have produced a shadow that would have been casted on the ground or the surface, as well as a shadow that was formed on the actual form, which we refer to that as form shadow. And the shadow directly beneath the object now, that is the shadow at the base of the object, we refer to that as the occlusion shadow. Now the line that separates the light values from the shadowed area, or the darker values, we refer to that as the terminator line. That's the midline, okay? So now at this point in time, what we are going to attempt to do is we're going to put all of what we would have discussed just now in practice. We are going to apply the science that we would have discussed to see how best we are able to recreate or to simulate rather the effect of light as it interacts with form. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to be doing, I'm going to be doing it with a sphere, or we're going to draw a circle, right? So I like to hold my pencil like this overhand because it gives me a lot of freedom in terms of movement, versus if I hold it like this, I'm just limited to this small space here, versus overhand, I can go all the way around. Now for the benefit of this presentation, I am going to be making these lines as well dark enough so you can see what's actually happening. Normally I would make it a lot less dark than what you see here, okay? So that more or less is a linear representation of what I hope to turn into a form, right? So I said before, the light must have direction, and we're going to establish this spot right here as the light source. So put a little flashlight right there, and remember that the light, or let us put it further here. So this is our flashlight, right? The light travels in a straight line. So light rays travels in a straight line. So we're going to draw the light ray and allow it to touch the edge of the shape, right? It's not formed yet because we wouldn't have applied any values to it. So we still refer to it as a shape. And then we're going to draw this other line coming all the way down as straight as we possibly can until it hits the surface. We're going to draw a line behind to suggest the surface on which the ball is. Now, what these two lines do, it actually tells us the length of the shadow, believe it or not. So if we were to take the light source and shift it down a bit, as was demonstrated, it would cause the shadow to appear to be longer, right? So what we would do to draw the shadow here, we would do an ellipse right underneath, and start it from this line and stop it here, and that's basically what the length of the shadow how the length of the shadow would appear, right? Then we are going to establish the terminator, right? Going to say that this half of the object is where which would be shaded dark, right? And so I'm going to erase this line. So now we're going to go and we're going to try and apply some values. Now there's some trick to trade, right, that you need to know. Pressure control when we're shading or when we're trying to achieve tonal value is very important. And one of the things that I like to encourage people to do is to practice. Practice varying your pressure control. And if you notice, as I go across, I allow it to get darker and darker and darker by applying more and more pressure, so you can see the transition from light to dark. It's the same thing we're going to be doing here, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to use lines to shade that first half. So we're going to block in the shadow and block in the shape of the form shadow as well as the casted shadow. Now you look and you realize you can't see the difference between the circle here and the shape of the ellipse at the base. And that can be easily remedied, because right below the shape we would have the occlusion shadow. We can go ahead and strengthen the line right underneath it. And in so doing, it automatically, just by adding this a darker value line here, it automatically starts to suggest the three-dimensional quality that we see at times. And then we create that gradation or ombre effect by varying the pressure that we apply to the pencil on the surface, right? Then we go ahead and fill this in as best as we're able. So once we put the shadow on, you realize it starts to suggest to our minds that, hey, there's something there blocking this light. And the shape of the shadow is also suggesting, you know, what the shape of the form is like. Now, one of the things that I didn't do in our little demonstration, I should have changed the surface on which the ball was sitting on, to show you what would happen when the light hits the dark surface as opposed to the white. All right, so we are going to assume that this is a white surface. So right along here, we are going to make this section, again, a bit darker. And this here I'm using a cross hatch technique. So this is the terminator. This is where the light breaks from the lighter values at the top. So basically, you know, what the value is just to show the transition. Value is basically just trying to show the transition between light and dark. Between light and dark. And so we're going to take this and we're going to big sweeps across the object here. Trying to do this as quickly as I can. And then right at the base, we also will darken as well. Now the pencil that I'm using is just a simple HB, 2HB pencil. So it's not a fancy pencil, just so you know. But what makes this work is the application, you know, applying what we would see in reality The line here needs to be strengthened a bit. And for this part, we're going to fade it. Need to bring it down a bit more. And that fade or transition, as said before, we achieve that by varying the pressure that is applied to the pencil. And I guess my rule of thumb, what I normally try to do, on this half, I normally try to represent at least 3 values. I normally try to show a dark, a middle, and a light value, even though I'm working on the dark part of the object, right? So this part is the part, this section here is the part that is blocked, where the light is blocked the most. The line here, you try and make sure the line that you put right along the edge here is more or less consistent with the values that you have right at this spot. That's where the terminator is. Now, because the light is up here, we are assuming that the highlight would be somewhere around here. We don't need to worry about that for now. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and shade in a pattern that reflects the shape of the object, the section of the object that has the highlights. Alright, so basically what we're doing, we're just using reality as a reference to guide how we represent light. You see, it starts to have that three-dimensional. So this part here, this band that I'm trying to create right here, you can call that your middle gray. Right, so once the middle gray is done, what we want to do is fade from this dark section here up into the light. If you notice, I'm not really spending a lot of time trying to get this refined or anything like that. It's just applying the knowledge as best as I can. Right? We can just shade everything up at the top here. The rest of it flat. It doesn't matter. You can shade the top of it flat. You don't have to worry that, oh, it's not going to look right. It will look right, as you can see clearly. Because obviously the part that has the strongest or most intense light will be more or less consistent. We can just strengthen the edge here a bit, just to help with the suggestion of form. So we see right under here that we have some reflective light, and this is a secondary light, right? And because the light is coming like that, we can drop a little highlight right there, here. So we're going to shade this a little bit more so the highlight will become more evident. So you see, some people, they believe that You have to smudge the work in order to get it to look how it's supposed to look. You don't necessarily have to smudge the work. All you have to do is place the values in the correct position and use the values to represent the shape of the object that you're going for. And that in and of itself will help you to achieve that three-dimensional effect, right? So when we talk about value, cannot divorce it from light and the effects that light will produce when it hits a three-dimensional object. Okay, I have with me 8B. I'm going to use the 8B to even get this line under here to be a bit darker. A bit darker on this side as well. And because the 8B, the point is a lot softer, then I don't have to apply as much pressure. And I can get a more smoother, consistent, or 6B or 4B would do just the same. But with the 8B, you can just imagine that the point would be significantly softer than the ordinary. Okay? We don't necessarily want to outline the object, because in so doing, it's gonna kill that three-dimensional effect that you're able to achieve from the use of values. So you don't want to do that any at all. Right? If you want to show lines on it, what is recommended is that you can go and shade the background. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to include a little line here and there, just so you can see the form that I am trying to achieve. A representation of form. Okay. The closer you keep your lines, by the way, the smoother it will appear. The more consistent you are in terms of your rendering, the better the effect, the more uniform, the more professional it will appear. So you don't need to use all sorts of things to get that nice smooth effect. It can be achieved, it just takes practice, consistent practice. I'm not sure what you're seeing on the screen, but from my perspective, this looks pretty good to me. And we can see clearly some of the effects that we would have discussed relative to the application or the use of form in achieving the effect, this three-dimensional effect that we're going for, right? We can see the terminator. We can see the terminator, which is this band, this darker band right here. We can see the reflective light, which is this light that comes and hit underneath and is shining under the base light right here. We can see the direct light, which is this section up here. And we can also, well, I'm not sure if you're able to see the highlight any at all. Let me see if I can make that a little bit more dramatic. Okay, so the highlight will be right here. I don't know if you can see that. And then we can, in some instances, suggest a little light down here as well, just to make it a little bit more dramatic. And that's basically how we go about achieving that three-dimensional quality, right? Um, all right, so that's it. All right, so thank you for joining us for today's lesson. As you can see, it's very important that we understand. I should have probably said this at the start, but if you don't understand the science behind light and how it affects form and how form is perceived, it's going to be very difficult for you to apply the use of value in representing form. Okay? So, which is why one of the reasons we stress the importance of you actually drawing from observation to observe the phenomena, what happens when direct light hits form, or whether it's an indirect light, what happens when the form is in a white area or versus a darker area. How is it perceived when light hits it? And so that's our lesson today on value and the element value, which is the gradation between light and dark, and form, which is the three-dimensional effect achieved when we apply value to a shape. Okay? So until next time, I am Sean Lawton. Keep safe and continue to wear those masks.